I'm rising today to talk about the vision we have ahead for the next 2 years and how this United States Senate can fulfill its responsibilities under the Constitution to do its legislative responsibilities addressing the big issues facing America. Now, I don't think anyone is unaware that the last 2 years this chamber has seen simply inaction and paralysis. It's been rated as one of the worst 2-year sessions in the history of the United States government. Well, what are we going to do differently? How is it that we only addressed 1 out of 24 appropriation bills over the last 2 years? How is it that so many important bills never made it to the floor of the Senate? Bills such as the replacement for No Child Left Behind coming on bipartisan vision out of committee. How is it that so many bills came to this floor to never see a final vote? The Disclose Act, which would have eliminated secrecy in campaign donations. The DREAM Act, which would have honored creating a future for those who know only America as their home. The President's Jobs Package, which would have helped put America back to work. The closing of loopholes for the biggest, most wealthy oil companies. Those funds could be put to use reducing our deficit or funding critical programs for working Americans. On issue after issue after issue, we saw inaction. And what we heard yesterday at the start of this next 2 years was a call from the President for action. He said in his inaugural speech, "For now, decisions are upon us, and we cannot afford delay. We cannot mistake absolutism for principle or substitute spectacle for politics or treat name-calling as reasoned debate." He continued, "We must act, knowing that our work will be imperfect. We must act, knowing that today's victories will be only partial." The President echoed, if you will, the thought that he brought into his first 4 years, the urgency of now, that we have big issues facing America, and it's time for the executive branch and the legislative branch to work together to address those issues. Well, in this call for action, we must ask, how much action can there be if we see more than 100 filibusters in the next 2 years? How much action can there be if on every request for a vote, an objection is heard that creates a day of delay in this Senate? The contrast is enormous from the time that Lyndon B. Johnson was President of the Senate. Lyndon B. Johnson, during 6 years presiding over this body, saw 1 filibuster. And Harry Reid, in his 6 years presiding over this Senate, has seen 391 filibusters. And let me convey that even when you have the votes to end a filibuster, the fact that it is launched creates enormous paralysis. Imagine you're debating a bill, and you continue debating through the end of a week, and you come in the following Monday and you debate, and nobody has anything left to say, so someone says, "I ask unanimous consent that we have a final vote on this bill." Now, you see, we don't have a previous question motion on this floor, so one has to ask for unanimous consent, meaning any of 100 senators can weigh in and say no. And when they weigh in and say no on that Monday, then on Tuesday, a petition is put forward with 16 senators saying, "Let's have a vote on closing debate." And that vote can't happen until Thursday under the rules. And if it's successful on a Thursday, you have to have 30 hours more of debate before you can hold the final vote. That takes you into Saturday. So Monday through Saturday is lost based on an objection on Monday by 1 senator. If you have 391 of these objections that waste a week of our time in the course of a 6-year period, then you basically waste every legislative week, because there are not 391 weeks in a 6-year period. Well, it becomes pretty simple to see why we only got 1 appropriation bill done in the last 2 years, why so many bills never made it to the floor of Senate for consideration, even though they were essential to restoring the economic vitality of our nation and putting people back to work. And I, for one, find this absolutely unacceptable. There have been, over our history, three basic forms of filibusters. Now, the first only worked in an age when transportation didn't work very well, and at any given moment, there were a number of members that couldn't get here to the floor of the Senate because they were traveling from their farm and their axle on their wagon broke, or the train broke down, or so on and so forth. Sometimes those journeys would take many weeks, and things happened along the way. In that situation, a quorum of 50% plus one was sometimes in doubt. And those seeking delay could say, you know what, let's deny a quorum. Well, that was an effective tool only through that early period. And then, as that changed, folks said, you know, we have the respect here of hearing everyone out. And therefore, if I can get the floor of the Senate, I can delay this Senate as long as I'm able to speak. Well, it's through this effort that we have a number of famous filibusters. Folks like Strom Thurmond holding forth for 24 hours. We have, however, seen that a person can only delay the Senate for 24 hours, then someone else can seek the floor, and you can proceed. So that was a fairly modest strategy. Now, in both the case of the denying quorum and in the case of speaking as long as you could, you had to spend time and energy, you had to organize, and it was visible before this body. It was visible before the reporters gathered in the balcony. Therefore, the American people, long before there was a television camera here, could see what you were doing, and the public could provide feedback on that. But now we come to the modern era, from 1970 forward, in which it became popular to start using the objection as an instrument of party warfare, the objection to a final vote. Now, if we turn back before 1970, you had an overlap between the parties of perhaps 30 members. And so if one had used this objection, they would have a good sense that you'd be able to get cloture. Furthermore, there was a social contract that you only interrupted the workings of this body on an issue of deep principle. You only blockaded the operations of the Senate on an issue of profound concern to your state, not as a routine instrument of party politics. But that's changed over the last 45 years, since 1970 forward, last 43 years, in which the minority party has said, let's show the majority can't even get an agenda onto the floor of the Senate, and then let's complain about them not acting. You know, this is not a philosophy that serves America. It's not a philosophy that was embraced through the extent of our history. You came here with the responsibility to contribute in committee, to contribute on the floor, try to make bills better, try to get issues addressed, not try to paralyze this body so issues don't get addressed so you can campaign on that side. That, quite frankly, is an unacceptable theme that has started to haunt this hall, and we need to do something about it. Indeed, if you look at the modern era where the parties have become so divided, you no longer see that overlap of 30 senators. And therefore, any minority group, be it the Democrats, be it the Republicans, has the ability to bring this chamber to a halt. But is it right to do so? And if we cannot persuade our colleagues it is wrong to do so, then we need to change the rules of the U.S. Senate. We need to say that if you are going to take and throw a shoe into the gears, if you're going to blockade the ability of the Senate to deliberate and decide, then you need to take responsibility here on the floor of the Senate. Yes, we should get rid of the filibuster on the motion to proceed. Filibustering on whether to get to a bill does not enhance deliberation on the bill itself. We should make that decision in a crisp fashion and get on to the work, not waste weeks trying to decide if we're going to do the work of the people. Second, we should get rid of the filibuster on going to conference committee. Both chambers have decided. They have voted in favor of a bill. It's been passed in different forms. Nothing should impede getting to conference and having a negotiation. Indeed, out of those negotiations, even if you're starting with one chamber with one dramatic view different from the other, is a coming together that may take steps forward that both chambers can agree to. Nothing should impede that negotiation from going forward. recognize a bill can still be filibustered when it comes back from committee. So why would you impede getting to conference committee in the first place? And yes, we should greatly reduce the number of hours after we have gotten cloture on debate. On nominations, by the time folks vote on closing debate, they know how they're going. Our members know how you're going to vote on that nominee. So have a final 2 hours, but not a final 30 hours. 30 hours is another wasted set of days that we can ill afford to waste. And certainly, it does make sense to say whenever possible we should cut down that 30 hours on bills after we've reached cloture. We can do it by unanimous consent, and often do now. We can do it by requiring folks to proceed to a vote if they don't stand and talk, but that's post-cloture. But here's the thing. When 41 senators say they want additional debate, they want to delay the decision-making process here in the Senate, then they should be willing to stand and make their case before their colleagues and before the American people. Now it takes time and energy if you go that direction. It doesn't become a freebie that one senator spending no time, no energy, who can go off to dinner, who can go off on vacation, can paralyze the Senate. No, now you have to spend the time and energy to be here to make your case. And not only is that important in stripping away frivolous filibusters, but it means the American people get to weigh in. I'm absolutely convinced that if we were going back to the debate on the Disclose Act, which stripped away secrecy in campaign donations, we had 59 votes to close debate. We needed a 60th. And so those who voted for additional debate fled this chamber, fearful of making their case before the American people. If they had had to stand and defend secrecy and foreign donations in our campaign system, the American people would have said, not that you're a hero, but you're a bum. They would have weighed in and said to their own senators, join the effort to close debate, because to stand in the way of a final vote over secrecy and campaign donations does great damage to our democracy. And maybe the pressure and common sense of the citizens would have helped address the bitter partisanship that divides this body. At a minimum, the citizens of this nation have the right to know what is happening to legislation here on the floor. The idea that it is being paralyzed by this secret filibuster is unacceptable. So we should include the talking filibuster in any package that we bring to modify the rules of the Senate. I see my colleague from New Mexico has come to the floor, and he spoke earlier. He has taken and put forward the vision that we must, at the start of every 2 years, evaluate how the Senate is working. And if it has problems, we need to pass changes in the rules to address those issues. And this is not some remote concept of inside baseball. This is about American citizens having a legislature that can address the big issues facing our nation. So I praise him for his leadership in putting this forward that has led to this day, the second time. We were here 2 years ago making this case, making this argument that we owe it to our citizens to improve the workings of the Senate. And we're here again today. There is a saying about the U.S. Senate that the Senate is the world's greatest deliberative body. If only it were so. It has been, at various points in its history, a thoughtful chamber, a deliberative chamber, but not today. Driven by deep partisan differences and those being converted into strategies of paralysis that prevent deliberation. We must change that. It is our responsibility as senators to change that. The American people expect it. Let's make it so. Thank you, Madam President.